my focus is going to be three things. One will be to show you how Linux admins administer users. Two, how Linux admins do network configuration. Three, how Linux admins create a folder share, all of which can be visible from the Windows arena. And really, some of this requires a bit of culture change. And I'll show you what I mean. For example, in Windows, right here, I have a Windows Server 2012 machine. Right here. And if you wanted to change an IP address on this machine, what would you do? Let me just check this really quick. Make sure. Yep. If you wanted to change IP address on this machine, you would open up Network and Sharing. This is, of course, Windows. And you would select Change Adapter Settings. You would select Ethernet and go into Properties. Click on IPv4, let's say, and change the address and the DNS right here. This is probably the way you're used to doing it. Well, the thing is that despite many efforts on part of Microsoft to pull people into command line as much as possible, it's been a rather difficult course. So I want to show you something. I'm going to show it to you in Windows, and then I will show it to you in Linux. In Windows, you use the netsh command to allow the changing of IP address. So you type netsh int IPv4 show interface, and when you do that, you notice it shows you that you have an Ethernet interface and you have a loopback interface. And Ethernet interface is the one that you want to assign the IP address to. If I switch over to my Linux box, which is right here, this is Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.1. And on my Linux box, I open up the terminal. And I'm going to log in as a root user. And if I type in ifconfig over here, right now it shows the interface ET80. ET80 is the equivalent of the Ethernet interface on the Windows side. ET80 is the first Ethernet adapter that is available inside of this Linux box. That is available inside of this Linux box. And right now, it's got an IPv6 address, and this is really the equivalent of an APIPA address in Windows, a 169.254 address. Basically, it means that there is no IP address assigned to this box. Otherwise, it would show it just like it's showing in this loopback address. You see how this shows 127.0.0.1, which is a loopback address? You would see a line item underneath this that would show the IP address, but there is no IP address assigned to this box. Now, in Linux, we can assign an IP address by doing ifconfig instead of ipconfig. You do ifconfig ET80, which is my interface, and I want to assign the IP address of 10.10.10.10.10. And then I'm going to do netmask of 255.255.255.0, and then I'm going to say I want to bring this interface up, and I press enter. And then I type ifconfig, and take a look right here. I see the interface 10.10.10.10 and assigned right there, and there's my network mask that I assigned. Okay. So in the case of Linux, I can assign a static IP address this way. I can also go to the system menu item, and I can go into Preferences, Network Connections, and specify ET80, go to Edit, go to IPv4 settings, change this to manual, and then assign an address here. This graphical way of assigning an IP address is not the way experienced Linux admins assign IP addresses or any networking configuration. As a matter of fact, most Linux admins that are traditional Linux admins or experienced Linux admins do just about everything at the command line. So if I went into Windows, since I'm such a command line nut, when I go into Windows, I can type netsh int, which is interface, IPv4, set address Ethernet. This Ethernet right here, is this Ethernet interface right here. And since this is Windows, uppercase, lowercase doesn't matter. Static 10, 10, 10, 20. Just like that. 255, 255, 2550. And I press enter, and the IP address is assigned. When I go back to the graphical interface and I right-click over here and go to Properties and go over to IPv4 and I go to Properties, you see the IP address 10.10.10.20 is assigned right there, just like I did right over here. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is there is usually an easier solution in Windows at the command line if you are accustomed to command line. And if you're not accustomed to command line in Windows, well, I'm here to tell you, start to get used to it, because it will help you move into the PowerShell arena as well. Let me show you something else in Windows that you do using the graphical interface. This Windows Firewall right here on the bottom left, here's a Windows Firewall interface. If I say allow an app or feature through the firewall, I'm sure you guys have done this, and I look through this, you will notice that in this listing here I have file and printer sharing enabled. I'm going to disable this right here, okay? I'm going to disable file and printer sharing right here, and I'm going to click OK. Now what this is going to do is, from my Linux environment, if I do ping 10, 10, 10, 20, it pings my Windows box. As you can see, the IP address that I have here is 10, 10, 10, 10, and I'm able to get to my box on the Windows side just by pinging it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Windows right here, and I'm going to do ping 10, 10, 10, 10, and there I am able to ping this box just fine. So once I have set this up, I'm able to ping within the environments. However, in Windows, if I wanted to change this file and printer sharing, if I wanted to turn this on, there's a very easy way to do it in PowerShell. If I type PowerShell, here I am in the PowerShell prompt, and all I really have to do is I have to know this group right here, this file and printer sharing group. Okay. Now uppercase, lowercase doesn't matter, but I just have to know what it's called. So in PowerShell, all I have to do is I do set net firewall rule, just like that. And then I specify the display group. And the display group, it says, as you can see, display group is file and printer sharing, just like that. And then I say enabled is true, just like that. And by doing so, there you go, it enabled it. Now, when I cancel out of this, go back in it, go down to file and printer sharing, look at that. There it is enabled. You see it? I want to show you something else that I think you need to know as it pertains to Windows and command line. The reason I'm doing this, really, is to show you, what is PowerShell? Eddie, PowerShell is the scripting administrative scripting tool that is available as of Windows 7. It gives you tremendous amount of resources to automate administrative tasks in Windows. Okay, it's been around for 7 years. All right? It's been around for 7 years. So if you haven't learned it and you haven't worked with it, I would urge you to begin playing with it and to begin working with it. All right? If I open up in Windows, if I open up Server Manager, and while that's opening up here, I'm going to go over to Linux, and I'm going to type in make directory, and I'm going to make a directory off of the root, call it NFS data. Now, by the way, Linux is case sensitive. So uppercase, lowercase makes all the difference in the world. Okay? Uppercase, lowercase makes all the difference in the world. So when I do NFS data, here I am in the NFS data directory. Okay? A few other things that I want to tell you. By typing who am I in Linux, you'll get to see who you're logged in as. Also, if you notice right over here, the default prompt will tell you who you're logged in as. Okay? By typing in cd space /, you go to the root directory and then go down to the directory tree from there. This lists you the directory structure that you're in off of the root. And this tilde means you are in the home directory of the user that you're logged in as. Okay, it tells you that you're in the home directory of the user that you're logged in as, in this case, root. So if I just type cd enter in Linux, it will always take me to my home directory. Okay. CD and pressing, by typing in cd and enter, it always takes me to my home directory. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go to the etc directory. I want to use VI, which is an editor in Linux and Unix, and I want to create a file called exports. And in this exports file, I want to put in the NFS data directory off of the root, and I want to say that I want to give permission to anybody on the 0 network or on the 10.10.10 network, the read-write permissions, and by typing in no root squash means that I want to allow anybody read-write permissions to the NFS data share that is on this network. The /24 means 255.255.255.0. That is 24 bits for the subnet mask. And the file has to be located in the etc directory, and it has to be called exports, plural. Okay? Has to be called exports. Has to be in the etc directory off of the root. etc is a very important directory structure in Linux and Unix. It contains a lot of the configuration files needed to run the OS. So if I type cat exports, that is the same thing in Windows as typing the exports file. And here's what I typed in. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type service NFS restart, and I press enter. And it tried to shut down the service, but since it wasn't even running, the shutdown process failed. Then it wanted to start the NFS services, and all of those started just fine. If I try to restart the service again, of course, this time, the NFS service is running, so it was able to shut down, right? And then it restarted again. So NFS data directory. And I'm going to create a file in here called my file in Linux. This is a test file in Linux. Can I see this file in Windows Server 2012 using the NFS client mount command? Yes or no? And then I'm just going to save this. If I do cat, that's what I typed in. It's just a text file. The reason I typed in a text file is because I want to see if I can see this file in Windows once I share it using NFS. So I just created the share NFS. Okay. In NFS, I'm going to go over to Windows. And in Windows, if I select Add Roles and Features, here it is, Client for NFS. That's what I was looking for. Client for NFS. Now, I can check this box and click Next. Okay. I can check this box and click Next and install Client for NFS so that I can connect to an NFS server. Or I can go in PowerShell, which is my favorite. Here's PowerShell. And I can select Install Windows Feature, just like that. Name, NFS Client. Install, oh, not install. Include all sub-feature, and I press Enter. And here it is, installing the NFS Client feature. The same thing that I would have installed from that graphical interface in Server Manager. So once this is done, I'm going to go to Server Manager, and I'm going to take a look, and you'll see that it will install, it will have installed the NFS client. I can ignore this message because I don't care about automatic updating, but it did show me that the exit result is success. See it? Client for NFS. Okay, success. I'm going to clear out of here, go over to Server Manager, add roles and features, click Next, click Next, click Next, click Next. Here's the Client for NFS. See it? Installed. It's already checked. Exactly what's happening. Linux has something called the Firewall. It's called IP tables in Linux. If I type service, IP tables off, like not off, stop. There it is. It stopped the firewall. This is the same thing in Windows as basically turning the firewall off. Now I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to go back to Windows, and I'm going to try to mount this again. Look, it mounts just fine. Go to the Z drive, do a dir, type my file in Linux, and there it is. Okay. I'm able to see what I typed in Linux. So that's an easy way to create a share. All right. Go back over here. And so right now, if I type PWD, PWD stands for Present Working Directory. This is the directory that I'm in. etc sysconfig network-scripts. And in this directory, if I type cat, which is the same thing as typing the word type, if cfg et80, you will see that right now my network configuration for my Ethernet 0 is as shown. What you notice is that the IP address is not listed here. So what does that mean? Well, if I type ifconfig, it shows me the IP address, but this IP address will only be valid for this session. As soon as I restart this machine, it will go back to no address at all. If I want the IP address to stick, if I want the static address to remain and persist, actually, I will need to go into if cfg et80, and I will need to supply it with IPADDR equals 10, 10, 10, 10, net mask equals 255.255.255.0, like that. And then I want to save this file. Now this file right here, if cfg et80, there will be one if cfg file inside of this directory, eth sysconfig network-scripts. Okay. There will be one of these files inside of this directory for each adapter that I have. In this case, I've got the ETA0 adapter, and as a result, I can see the IP address assigned to it. If I go to the graphical interface, System Preferences, Network Connections, ETA0, Edit, IPv4 Settings, notice this file right here, this ifconfig ETA0, this is a file that this graphical interface reads. And it's also the file that the graphical interface writes to. Right? Most seasoned network administrators in Linux will not use the graphical interface. They will always revert back to command line to gain access to everything. Okay, let me show you something else inside of Linux, and I'm going to compare it to Windows with you. I'm sure you have used Active Directory users and computers in Windows many times, basically to create Active Directory users. And here I am. It's going to bring up ADUC, or Active Directory users and computers. Here it is. And in here, as you can see, I've got a users container where I've got my users. I've got I don't have any OUs right now, but I want to show you what I normally do in Windows. And by the way, if you're not used to doing things this way, start to get accustomed to doing things this way. In command line, I can use the command dsadd. Now this has been around since Windows 2000. This command, dscomputer, dsadd user, quota, all these, this has been around for quite some time. This will let me create objects in Active Directory. So if I type dsadd OU equals train DC class DC edu, and I press enter, you notice it says right here that dsadd succeeded. It created an organization unit called train underneath my domain component class, domain component edu. There will always be at least 2 domain components in Active Directory or in directory services. One domain component will be prefix, one will be suffix. There may be more, like sales.class.edu, execs.class.edu, but there will always be at least 2. If I go to class.edu over here and I do a refresh, notice there's now a train organization unit right there. If I go over to the command line and I type dsadd user cn equals Rafiq, dc ou equals train, dc equals class, dc equals edu, password, and disabled, no. So there it is. It created a user called Rafiq. CN stands for common name. Okay. CN stands for common name user Rafiq. Inside of the organization unit train, inside of the domain component class, inside of domain component edu. When I refresh the train OU, you notice Rafiq is right there. So that's a way you can create a user, one way you can create a user in directory services. If I type PowerShell and I press enter, and then I type in PS drive and I press enter, in PowerShell, if I take a look right now, I don't have anything over here that says that I've got Active Directory enabled. And that is very easy to do. I'm going to set the execution policy to remote signed, which will allow me to run scripts in PowerShell. And then I'm going to import module Active Directory, just like that. And there it is coming in. Now if I type PS drive, I notice there is an AD with Active Directory in there right now. Why am I showing you this in Windows? Well, because I'm going to show you a couple of ways I can add users using command line in Windows, and I'm going to show you the same thing in Linux. I'm showing you the command line way of doing things in both places. So in Windows, I can type cd:/enter, and now I'm in Active Directory. I can type cd dc equals class, dc equals edu, and I do a dir. Look, here is my train container. See it? Organization unit. It's right there. Everything I see here is right over here. I see more things here than I see there because I don't have advanced features enabled over here. If I go to Active Directory Users and Computers, click View, select Advanced Features, I see more items listed, as you can see. I see TPM devices, right? I see NTD as quotas, and so on. If I type cd OU equals train, okay, there's OU equals train, I do a dir. There is the user Rafiq that I just created. I can type in new AD user Tom C and press enter. Done. I go over to the train organization unit and do a refresh. There's the Tom C user. The reason, if you can notice a little itty bitty arrow in there, there's a little down arrow, that's because the user is disabled because there's no password assigned to that user, and the user cannot be enabled without a password. But that's how easy it is to add a new user in Active Directory. It's also just as easy to remove an AD user in AD as well. There it is. I just remove the user Tom C that I just added. If I go to train and I do a refresh, look, Tom C is gone. Let me take you back to Linux. If I type in Linux, there's a file in Linux called, in the etc directory off of the root, there's a file called PASSWD. This file contains all of the users that are inside of the Linux system. Root will always have a user ID and a group ID of 0. 0 is a user ID and 0 is a group ID. X means the password for root is stored in a separate file. Okay? Then root is the name of the user. /root is the home directory for the user, and bin bash is the shell that the user root will use. There are many shells and command shells: T shell, C shell, corn shell, born shell. There are many different shells that a user can use. Finally, on the bottom, there's a user called admin. And the admin user has a user ID of 500 and group ID of 500. Well, in Linux, inside of Red Hat anyway, every user also gets their own group. Okay? Every user also gets their own group. Admin is also a group. It's kind of interesting. If you wanted to give someone permissions equivalent to admin, you could do so by just adding them to the admin user group. Strange when you think about the way Windows works. User ID of 500 and group ID of 500 is the very first number or very first ID number where user-created groups and user-created user IDs can exist. Every user ID and group ID that's under 500 is created by system, such as ID 68, ID 89, ID 498 and 496, and group ID and user ID do not have to be in sync. You're always going to have fewer groups than you will have users. Group IDs are created based on how many groups exist in your structure. The file PASSWD holds the name of all of the users in your system. This file is only editable by a Linux administrator who has permissions to administer and manipulate this file. The passwords are stored in a file called shadow. And I'll show you that file as well. Here's the shadow file. Root user. The password for the root user is this right here. All of these. Of course, as you can see, it's encrypted. That is not my password. And this identifies the password expiration, the number of times a password is valid for, how many days the password is going to be, how many days the grace period will be given before the password expires, and so on. But the shadow file is where the passwords are kept. If it's an asterisk, that means that nobody can log in as that user. Only the system can log in with that user account. If it's an exclamation point, it means that there is no password assigned to that user, and as a result, the user is disabled. Okay? That's what the exclamations mean. Asterisk mean only the system logs in as that user. Exclamation means the user is disabled. Okay? And here's a password for admin, for example, right here. So in Linux, if you wanted to add a user, notice right now, if I type in cat password, which is my user list, grep admin. Now grep admin means to search for the entry for admin inside of the password file. So it gave me the entire line inside of the password file that had the word admin in it. Right? Makes it easy for me to find stuff. So the last line for the last user, or for the only user that was created at the time the machine was installed, was admin. And since admin is the first user created by the user, me, who installed it, that's the reason for the user ID of 500. So I'm going to create a new user. I'm going to do user add Rafiq. There it is. Now when I do grep Rafiq, you see the user ID and the group ID of 501. You also see my home directory as home Rafiq and my default script, my default shell as bash. If I create a group, if I do group add sales, like so, and then I do group add execs. Okay, so now I added two groups, sales and execs. Notice right now, Rafiq has a user ID and group ID of 501 because there are no other groups created at the moment. So right now I'm going to create another user. User add James. Enter. This time when I grep James, look at the group ID 504. The reason the group ID is 504 is because group ID 500 belongs to admin. Group ID 501 belongs to Rafiq. Group ID 502 and 503 belongs to execs and sales. And group ID 504 belongs to James. Okay, so user IDs and group IDs make a very big difference when you're considering permissions and such. So right now, user James and user Rafiq do not have a password. Notice it says X right here. The second column X means a password is stored somewhere else. I'm going to do cat, let me clear this. I'm going to do cat shadow where the passwords are kept, and I'm going to do grep Rafiq. And look right now, see this asterisks? Asterisk. Exclamation points? That means that Rafiq cannot log in right now. Rafiq doesn't have a password. That's why the asterisks are there. And if I take a look at James, it'll be the same scene. See the two exclamation points. James cannot log on. James doesn't have a password assigned. The only entity that can log on as James is root. Root can do anything. Okay? Root can do anything. So now if I type in PASSWD Rafiq, that means assign a password to Rafiq. And I'm going to assign a password. And I'm going to confirm the password. And there it is. It updated the password. Now if I do grep Rafiq, here's my complex password. There it is. And it's in the second column. The rest of these assign password properties, such as I was telling you, how long the password is valid for, when the password will expire, how many days is a grace period, and so on. Right? And I got to do the same thing, PASSWD, for James. And then I put in the password for James, like so. And then I do a grep for James, and I notice the password for James is in there now, and I can get in as James. Okay? Clear out of that. If I go to the Windows environment and I go over to Active Directory, if I truly want to see all of the properties associated with a user inside of Active Directory, I would have to open up something called ADSI Edit. If I open up ADSI Edit, you'll see the sheer amount of information that is stored behind every user, since this is a secure directory. I'm going to expand that, click on Train, right-click on Rafiq and go to Properties, and just take a look at this. Look at all these attributes. These are all of the Active Directory attributes behind the user Rafiq. Okay? Many of which, as you can see, are not assigned. Why am I showing you this? Well, Active Directory users and computers, just that front end, is really not all there is to Active Directory. There's a lot involved behind the scenes. Just simply changing the view from advanced features to not including advanced features gives you and takes away some capability. Okay? So you saw permissions, you saw file share, you saw adding and manipulating of users, at least on the basic side. There's a lot more involved here. Okay? There's a lot more involved here than what you captured, than what you saw, or than what I was able to show you for now. I wanted to show you, first of all, that command line is used in both places, in Windows and in Linux. It's just that the culture of Linux is such that command line is used almost all the time by seasoned Linux administrators. And command line in Windows, unfortunately, is not used by most Windows administrators. So if you aren't used to it, start using it, and you're going to become familiar with it even more so. Okay? So that's what I wanted to show you.